There were stars once, bright enough to drown memory in light. Now they burned low, as though reluctant to witness what returned to their realms. The void was quiet, unbroken except for the slow drift of a single fortress ship, whose hull bore scars older than most civilizations that still clung to life. Its surface was dark steel veined with veins like living muscle beneath armor, an impossible blending of engineered flesh and forgotten metal, pulsing with a rhythm that echoed something once human. The galaxy around it did not recognize this vessel, nor the oath that had kept it alive. Yet the vessel remembered everything. It remembered devotion. It remembered betrayal. It remembered him. Before we begin, allow me to say this. Wherever you are, whoever you are, we truly appreciate that you are here. Your presence matters, and this story is meant to be shared, felt, lived through together. So before we continue, tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let us begin. The fortress ship, known only in half-spoken legends as the sepulchre of the living, cut slowly across dead star systems. Its engines produced no flame, no roar of propulsion, only a low harmonic hum like distant chanting under stone. On its prow was no crest of wolf, dragon, eagle, or serpent. Instead, carved into the bone-forged plating, there was a single human hand, open, palm forward, not in greeting, not in surrender, in memory. Deep inside its cold halls walked beings who should not have existed in this age. They were giants of sculpted flesh, armor grafted directly to musculature that repaired itself faster than it could be wounded. Their hearts beat without end. Their eyes did not close. Their sleep, when it came, was not rest, but recollection without mercy. They were the reverent host, the legion of living memory. No gene seed records recognized them. No imperial archives named them. They were erased from history, forgotten by decree and silence. But they had not forgotten. Their Primarch walked among them. Elion. He was not like the others, though he bore their regenerating flesh. His features were serene, marked by sorrow rather than anger, his eyes carrying a weight of remembrance that no mortal tongue could express. His armor was pale, not bright, like bleached bone beneath starless skies, decorated not with symbols of victory, but with small iron chains, each one representing something he had once vowed to protect. Some were broken, most were not. His footsteps echoed through a grand cathedral-like passageway within the ship, its walls engraved with visions of a past age. The Emperor standing upon scorched earth, stars rising behind him like a halo. Elion had carved these memories himself, with hands that healed even as they bled. He stood before a vast viewing window, transparent alloy nearly as strong as ceramite. Beyond lay a dying star system, its suns flickering like candles in a cold monastery. 3,000 years we drifted, Elion murmured, though no one else was present. His voice was quiet, every word deliberate. 3,000 years of waiting for a summons that would never come. Yet it had come, not recently, not from this age, but from then. A whisper cast across psychic resonance millennia ago, a command given by the Emperor himself, when his voice still carried warmth instead of myth. Return when the galaxy forgets what it was meant to become. A voice that could not be heard now, yet still lived inside Elion's memory. Footsteps approached from behind, soft, measured, reverent. Captain Sariel bowed his head, though his face, like all of the reverent host, was difficult to read. Their flesh held every scar they had ever suffered, every wound healed, but none vanished. Their bodies remembered harm as clearly as their minds remembered grief. "My lord," Sariel said, his voice steady, trained, but hollowed by long years. "The navigators report a sighting, a signal beacon, Imperial in origin." Elion did not turn immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the guttering stars. "How long has it been, Sariel?" Sariel did not ask what he meant. They never needed clarification among themselves. "Since we last saw the Imperium as it was, since the Imperial truth." Sariel's jaw tightened, a flicker of emotion passing behind eyes that had long forgotten how to weep. "We count time," he answered, "but time no longer counts us. By their records, 10,000 years. By ours, I could not say." Elion finally turned. 10,000 years. The galaxy had moved on without them. And yet, the memory of the Emperor, of the man, not the myth, still lived here, in their flesh, written into their marrow like sacred scripture. "Set course for the beacon," Elion said softly. Sariel hesitated, not out of disobedience, but out of concern. Concern born not from fear of death, but of purpose. "What if they do not recognize us?" he asked. "They will not," Elion said, with the certainty of someone who had foreseen the inevitable. "History is not written by those who remember. It is written by those who remain." Sariel's voice grew quieter. "And what if they hate what remains of us?" Elion stepped closer to him, placing one hand upon the captain's shoulder, not as commander, but as a father might to a beloved child long wounded. "Then we will remember for them," he said, "even if remembrance is the only mercy we may give." The ship adjusted course, its engines thrumming with a low resonance that awakened every sleeping memory within its halls. Some of the host paused in prayer, not to a god, but to the past. As the sepulchre of the living glided toward the beacon, the void began to shift. Shapes appeared, satellites, debris, broken vessel fragments, remnants of battles fought and forgotten. A shattered Imperial cruiser floated in ruin, its hull scorched and hollow. Elion's expression did not change, but something in him tightened. "War has not ended," he whispered. "We left it behind, and still it grows." Sariel's voice was a murmur. "War never needed us to continue." A transmission flickered across their displays, encoded, ancient in design, but unmistakably Imperial. Elion stepped forward. "Open the channel." Static surged, then a voice, strained, frightened, unbelieving. "This is Outpost Tertium 9. Unidentified fortress ship. State your allegiance." Elion closed his eyes. When he answered, his voice was calm, human, unadorned by glory. "We are the reverent host. We return, as commanded. We return to the Imperium of man." There was silence, then whispers, then fear. Elion knew. Already the galaxy did not know how to remember him, but he remembered it, and memory has weight. Their return had begun, and the galaxy was not ready. The silence that followed the transmission was not the ordinary quiet of space. It was the stillness of disbelief, of fear pressing against breathing lungs. Outpost Tertium 9 had expected pirates, raiders, perhaps the drifting wreck of some forgotten warship pulled by ancient gravity tides. Not a fortress ship whose name lived only in myth, spoken by scholars who were dismissed as dreamers. Not a legion, no archive acknowledged, no saint script praised, no curse condemned. Something outside history itself had returned, and history did not know how to speak of it. The voice on the other end did not reply a second time. The transmission remained open, filled only with the faint crackles of static and distant panicked whispers as officers surely argued behind muted microphones. Elion did not hurry them. He simply stood before the display, motionless, hands resting lightly at his sides, as though he had waited in that same posture for centuries. Perhaps he had. Sariel remained just behind him, shoulders squared with instinctive military readiness, though the war he prepared for had no clear enemy. The ship's corridors were beginning to stir now. The reverent host did not sleep in any true sense, but they entered long periods of stillness, stasis only in the loosest definition. When the ship's harmonic core changed pitch, they woke. Their wounds closed. Their minds did not. They gathered outside the strategium in quiet ranks, not marching, not saluting, simply standing. Their armor wasn't painted in heraldry or livery. It grew with them. Plates of hardened dermal alloy layered over bone reinforcement, each bearing scars not of war alone, but of memory. Some carried marks shaped like blade wounds. Others bore patterns like liquefied burns. A few seemed carved with words no one had spoken aloud for thousands of years. Every wound healed. None ever disappeared. One of the legionaries, a veteran whose name had once meant light on the long road, stepped closer. His voice was softer than one might expect from someone built to rend void steel with his hands. "Is it true?" he asked Sariel quietly. "Are we home?" Sariel did not answer immediately. His throat tightened around words that did not want to be born. "We are in Imperial space," he said. "Whether we are home remains to be seen." The veteran bowed his head, not in grief, but in understanding. Home was not coordinates on a star chart. Home was memory, and memory had been a burden too heavy to feel welcome in. Elion placed one hand on the viewing console. The faint light of distant stars cast pale illumination across his features, revealing not ageless smoothness, but a human weariness etched into immortal flesh. Every moment of the past 10,000 years lived behind his eyes at once. "They fear us," he said. Sariel nodded. "Fear is the first instinct of those who cannot remember." Elion's gaze did not waver. "We must give them cause to see beyond fear." A second voice cut into the transmission, sharper, controlled, steeped in bureaucratic protocol. "Unidentified vessel, this is Acting Commander Bellis Vaughn of Outpost Tertium 9. Your designation is unrecognized. Your claimed allegiance is unverified. You are ordered to remain stationary and prepare for inspection. Failure to comply will be interpreted as hostile intent." Sariel's jaw moved, but no sound came. The reverent host did not speak unless commanded. They did not contradict their primarch. But even they felt the insult, thinly wrapped in procedural caution. Elion simply closed the transmission channel. "They have forgotten the language we once spoke," he said softly. "Not in words, but in trust." Sariel's voice held a flicker of something, pain, or perhaps regret. "We could force compliance." "Yes," Elion murmured. "We could." The silence that followed was heavy. "But if we return in violence, then we return only as another wound upon the Imperium. And that is not why we were called home." The ship adjusted positioning thrusters, slowing to a near motionless drift relative to the outpost. The gesture was simple, but profound. Submission without surrender. A courtesy taught long before faith replaced reason. As the crew of Tertium 9 scrambled to assemble a boarding contingent, Elion turned away from the viewport. "Come," he said. Sariel followed him down the wide corridor, past rows of silent legionaries who watched their primarch pass. They did not salute. Salutes were gestures of pride. They only bowed their heads, not to authority, but to memory. The chamber they entered was like a cathedral carved into the ship's heart. The walls were etched with scenes, battles, councils, moments of unity and despair, but none depicted victory, They depicted choices, hard ones, human ones. A central dais rose from the floor, where the living tissue of the ship joined with metal conduits. Elion placed his hand upon its surface. The ship felt him, recognized him, responded with a pulse of slow, resonant light. "Do you know why we survived?" he asked, not looking at Sariel directly. Sariel paused. "Because we were commanded to." "No," Elion said. His voice was gentle but unwavering. "Many have been commanded to survive. Few remember why." Sariel turned his gaze toward the carvings on the wall. All were memories Elion had preserved with his own hand. "We survived," Elion continued, "because we remembered who we were before we were soldiers, before we were weapons, before we were legends." Sariel's chest rose slowly, the weight of millennia pressing down with every breath. "And now that we return," Elion let his hand fall from the dais. "Now we must learn what remains of that memory in the galaxy we left behind." The doors to the chamber slid open. A communications officer, a mortal one, stood just beyond the threshold. Her uniform was worn from stress, her expression tense, her eyes unsure whether to bow or remain rigid. She settled for stillness, like prey trying not to be noticed. "My lord," she said, her voice strained. "The boarding party requests permission to dock." Elion nodded. "Prepare to receive them. Sariel, accompany me." The officer hesitated. "There is one more matter. The outpost has transmitted an additional message. They request confirmation of your identity." Elion did not smile. There was nothing to smile about. "I will give them truth," he said. "What they do with it is their burden." The officer bowed and vanished. Sariel exhaled slowly. "They will not believe, even when they see." "No," Elion said. "But belief is not what we seek." He stepped forward onto the lowering platform that would meet the incoming boarding tunnel. "We seek remembrance." The airlock cycled. Metal touched metal. The first Imperial soldiers to see the reverend host in 10,000 years stood waiting in the boarding corridor, weapons drawn but not raised. Their armor was regulation grey with simple heraldry, practical, tired, mortal. They looked at Elion and his legion not as brothers, not even as enemies, but as something they did not have a word for. One of the Imperial sergeants stepped forward. His voice was controlled, but his hand trembled. "Identify yourselves," he said. Elion lowered his gaze to the man, not condescending but acknowledging, seeing him. "We are the Reverend Host," he said quietly. "We remember the Emperor as he was. We return not to demand his glory, but to restore his truth." The soldiers stared, confusion, fear, uncertainty, and then a flicker of something else, recognition, not from history, but from instinct, as if something inside the human soul remembered what the mind had forgotten. The sergeant swallowed hard. Then you are welcome," he managed, voice unsteady. Elion nodded once, solemn as a vow. The path ahead would not be easy, but it had begun. The outpost corridors were narrow, built for human proportions and not for giants of living steel and sinew. The Imperial soldiers who escorted Elion and Sariel walked with a stiffness that had nothing to do with discipline. Every footstep of the Reverend Host resonated through the metal decking, the weight of their regenerative bodies making the plates vibrate like distant thunder. The soldiers tried not to stare, but their eyes flicked again and again toward the legionaries' armor, the scars that never faded, the eyes that held too much time. No one spoke. Silence proved safer than any word that might break under the strain of fear. The outpost itself bore signs of long neglect, bulkheads patched with mismatched alloys, flickering lumen strips buzzing like insects trapped behind glass. This place was not built for glory. It was built to hold on, to endure, to survive long enough for someone to remember to care about it again. Sariel noticed everything. He always had. The uneven pressure in the air recyclers, the faint smell of sanctified oil mingled with stale metal. The priests here were not the kind who preached. They were the kind who held systems together with prayer because tools had run out centuries ago. It was a quiet suffering, the kind that left no battles to recount. Elion noticed everything too, but differently. He saw the same thing Sariel saw, yet to him each detail echoed with memory. A time when the Imperium's forward stations bore banners of exploration, not desperation. When the air smelled of new worlds waiting to be uplifted, not decayed systems waiting to be defended. When the Emperor's dream had been to lead humanity to a future free of fear, not chain it to survival through worship. He did not speak yet. Words were like blades, useful only when properly sharpened. The escort brought them to the command hall. Its doors opened with a reluctant groan, as if metal itself feared what might enter. Commander Bellis Vaughn stood at the center, surrounded by Auspex screens and data slates scattered across a control table. He was not tall, not imposing. He wore the expression of a man who had been awake for days longer than any body was meant to endure. He was thin, his hair graying despite his age, his armor functional but worn smooth. But there was a hardness in his gaze that came from holding a position no one else wanted. When he looked at Elion, the hardness did not break, but neither did it hold steady. "You approach this outpost claiming allegiance to the Imperium," he said, voice clipped, measured. "Yet no record recognizes your legion. No archive lists your banner. No hymn names your deeds." Elion stepped forward slowly. He was taller than any of them, but he did not allow his presence to weigh upon the space. He spoke with the quiet clarity of one who had long since ceased to need to raise his voice. Records fade, archives burn, hymns change with the mouths that sing them. Memory alone remains. Commander Vaughn's jaw clenched, not in anger, but in the struggle to keep doubt from breaking through certainty. "The Imperium is vast," he said, "but not so vast that a legion of your scale could simply vanish." Sariel's voice was steady, though there was grief threaded through it. "We did not vanish. We were forgotten." Vaughn's eyes narrowed. "No legion is forgotten." "One was," Elion said. The command hall went still. A murmur ran through the staff. A medic whispered to a technician. Someone drew a sharp breath. Elion continued. "We stood beside the Emperor during the Unification Wars. We crossed the void as pioneers, not conquerors. We fought not for empire, but for future, until the future was rewritten." Vaughn's stare hardened again, though now its foundation was brittle. "If you claim service during the Great Crusade, then you should know its end. You should know the Emperor ascended. You should know that faith—" Elion spoke before he could finish. "I know the Emperor I followed did not want to be worshipped." The words struck the room like a shockwave. The silence that followed was not simply quiet. It was pressure, suffocating, thick, trembling with the threat of violence. Every soldier's hand tightened around their weapon. Every priest in the shadows stiffened as though struck. Vaughn did not move. He looked at Elion as though trying to see into him, into memory itself. "You speak heresy," he said. But the words lacked conviction. Sariel took one step forward, and the soldiers raised rifles, though they surely knew rifles would not matter. But Sariel did not speak as a warrior. He spoke as a witness. We remember him as he was, he said softly, not as he has been remade by fear. Fear. It was the word that broke the air. Vaughn inhaled sharply, not in anger, in pain, because he recognized the truth beneath it. This outpost had seen no glory, no triumph, no intervention, only orders to hold, to endure, to believe, because belief was all that kept despair from taking root. And yet, here stood beings who carried memory older than his world's foundations, who spoke of the Emperor not as an idea, nor as a god, but as a man, a leader, a father, one who had dreamed of light, not worship. But the galaxy they had returned to no longer believed in men. It believed in sanctified myth. Vaughn exhaled slowly. "What do you want here?" he asked. Elion lowered his gaze, not in submission, but in sorrow, to see what remains of his dream. Vaughn's eyes softened, not enough to be called trust, but enough to be called recognition. "Our world is not a place of answers," he said. "It is a place of waiting, a place the Imperium forgot." Elion nodded. "Then we have come to the right place." Vaughn's shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in relief that, at last, someone else understood the weight he carried. He motioned toward the data slate table. "There is something I must show you," he said. "Something that arrived 3 weeks ago. A message from the ecclesiarchy. Declaration." Sariel's eyes flicked to Elion. Elion's expression did not change, but a stillness entered him, like the air before a storm. Vaughn picked up a tablet and handed it to him. The screen displayed a decree, sealed in crimson. Mandate of purity. All aberrant constructs of living flesh unaligned to recognized imperial gene lineage are to be classified as heretic biological anomalies and terminated with immediate sanctified force. No exceptions. Sariel's breath left him in a single silent exhale. The reverend host had been condemned by a galaxy that did not know their name, not for what they had done, but for what they were. Elion closed the slate. He did not speak right away. Words needed time when they carried grief. Finally, he looked up. "Prepare your choir," he said quietly. "A transmission will be made." Vaughn blinked. "You intend to respond to the ecclesiarchy?" "No," Elion said. His eyes reflected the dim lights of the command hall, like memory reflecting firelight from a distant past. "I intend to remind them." There was no pride in the way he said it, only truth. Sariel bowed his head, not in reverence, but in readiness. The outpost trembled, not from war, from history returning to claim its due. The air inside the outpost choir chamber was cold enough to miss the breath of those who still breathed. The mortal psychers gathered there were thin, frail figures wrapped in ceremonial veils, their eyes clouded by the strain of channeling the warp with minds not built for it. Their lips moved in silent prayers, practiced not for comfort, but for survival. They knew that to reach across the Imperium was to walk along the edge of a blade made of thought and fear. Elion stepped into the chamber with the measured calm of someone who had stood in places far darker. The reverend host did not follow him closely. They understood instinctively that what was about to pass between the warp and their Primarch was not meant for their presence. Only Sariel remained at his side, though he also kept a respectful distance, like a son watching a father perform a ritual old enough to be sacred simply because it had endured. Commander Vaughn stood behind the psychers, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had given permission for this transmission, but permission did not equal comfort. He understood the risk. He understood that inviting the attention of the ecclesiarchy was like placing one's hand beneath the guillotine and hoping the blade did not fall. Elion approached the choir dais. He did not kneel. He did not offer devotion. He simply placed his hand on the central psionic conduit, a great pillar of living crystal that pulsed with faint warp resonance. The psychers shifted, not in fear of Elion, but in awareness. They felt his presence in the warp, not as a blazing beacon like the Emperor, not as a predatory hunger like the demons, but as something deeply human. Memory, grief, love, unprotected by armor. One of the choir masters spoke softly. "We will open the channel when you give the sign." Elion's voice was almost a whisper. "Begin." The psychers lowered their heads. Their mouths opened, not to chant, but to breathe rhythm into the air. The warp did not respond to sound. It responded to emotion, to meaning, to wounds that never closed. The chamber dimmed. The lumen strips flickered. The walls felt farther away. Time stretched, and Elion spoke, not to the room, but to the warp. He remembered the first time he had stood beside the Emperor. The sky had been broken by storms of dust and fire, remnants of old night. Humanity was fractured, lost, afraid. The Emperor had been a figure of such clarity then. Not a god, not a myth, but a man who carried the weight of a species in his hands. Elion had stood with him, not because he was engineered to, but because he believed in the future the Emperor envisioned, a future where memory would guide, not haunt. As the warp opened, Elion let that memory flow through him, not as speech, as truth. The psychic channel flared. A presence on the other side stirred. Not the Emperor. Elion had never expected that. The Emperor no longer lived in forms the mortal mind could approach, but those who spoke for him, those who had turned his name into law. They listened. A voice came through, echoing through the chamber with layered tones, more liturgical proclamation than human language. "This signal is unauthorized. Identify yourself by decree of the Holy Synod." Elion did not raise his voice. "I am Elion, once Primarch of the 11th Legion, bearer of the living memory, son of the Emperor, though I claim no divinity." At once, the warp flared with agitation. The voices of the choir trembled. One collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Another whimpered prayers. The reply was sharp, cutting, like a blade sharpened by centuries of doctrine. "The 11th Legion does not exist. Your claim is false. The Emperor's word is law, and the law states you were never born." Sariel tensed. His hand rose, not to draw a weapon. There was no weapon to draw, but to brace against the weight of those words. They had carried the burden of erasure longer than any war wound. Elion did not respond with anger. He responded with sorrow. "I know," he said. "I know I was erased. I know we were removed so that the Imperium would not remember what it once promised to be. But forgetting does not undo truth. You worship him now, but I knew him. I knew the man who walked this galaxy not as a god, but as a father, and he did not ask you to kneel." The warp roiled. A psychic backlash struck several of the choir members. Blood trickled from a young psycher's nose. Another's breath came in ragged bursts, but they held. They held because Elion's presence steadied them, not by force but by memory. The ecclesiarchy voice hissed with controlled fury. "You speak blasphemy." "No," Elion said, and now his voice carried the quiet strength of something unbreakable. "I speak remembrance." A silence followed, a silence filled not with peace, but with dread realization, because the voice on the other side knew, not consciously, not logically, but in the deepest, oldest chambers of the human soul, something recognized Elion's words, not as heresy, as familiarity. Memory is the most terrible weapon because it cannot be commanded. It cannot be erased fully. It returns. The voice returned, now hollowed by something colder than anger. If what you claim is true, then your existence threatens everything. The Imperium stands on faith, faith built upon the Emperor's divinity. If you reveal him as mortal... Elion interrupted, not with force but with finality. I do not wish to destroy faith. I wish only that humanity remembers why it ever believed. That was when the voice hardened again, not with uncertainty this time, but with fear shaped into command. Then you and your legion will be eliminated, for the preservation of the Imperium, for the safety of mankind, for the glory of the Emperor. The channel snapped closed with psychic whiplash. 3 psychers screamed as blood ran from their ears. One collapsed entirely, unconscious. The choirmaster gasped, struggling to breathe, her hands trembling violently. Sariel moved forward, steadying one of the fainting psychers with the impossible gentleness of a warrior forged to break armies. Commander Vaughn exhaled, the sound mixing awe and horror. You knew they would respond that way. Elion lowered his hand from the crystal. His expression held no surprise, no fear, no rage, only inevitability. Yes, he said. Sariel stepped closer, voice quiet but fractured. Then why? Elion turned to him, not as a Primarch to a captain, but as a father to a son who feared pain without purpose. Because now we no longer return unnoticed, Elion said. Now the Imperium will come to us, and when they come, they will see, not myth, not heresy, not legend. He placed his hand over his heart. They will see memory. There were no cheers, no affirmations, no triumphant music swelled in the air, because this was not victory. This was the first betrayal returning to life, the one that had erased them, the one that now rose to erase them again. Sariel bowed his head, not to kneel, to prepare. The past had woken, and it was coming. The choir chamber remained heavy with the echo of the severed transmission. The air tasted of copper and ozone, as though lightning had burned the atmosphere from the inside. Sariel helped the psychers back to their resting alcoves, their limbs trembling with exhaustion, while attendants rushed forward with medici tools and whispered litanies meant less for healing than for courage. The mortal crew of Tertium 9 did not weep or wail. Instead, they stared at Elion with the stunned stillness of those who have just witnessed something mythic, something forbidden, something that should have been impossible. They had heard a Primarch speak to the Imperium itself, and the Imperium had answered with fear. Commander Vaughn did not leave the chamber immediately. He stood near the threshold, arms clasped behind his back, gaze lowered as though staring through the floor into the years of strain already carved into him. When Elion stepped past him, he spoke, not loudly, but with the voice of a soldier who knows he has chosen his battlefield. They will not negotiate, Vaughn said. They will not inquire. They will not question. He looked up, meeting Elion's eyes with a clarity sharpened by dread. They will come with fire. Elion gave a slow nod. I know. Sariel turned toward Vaughn, his tone softer, though there was something heavy beneath it. How long until they arrive? Vaughn released a breath he had been holding too long. Hard to say. When the ecclesiarchy calls, many answer simply to prove their devotion. A week, perhaps. A day, if a fleet was already near transit range. Hours, if fate is unforgiving. Sariel's jaw tightened. Fate had rarely been forgiving. Elion began walking through the corridor, and both men followed. The legionaries stationed throughout the outpost watched their Primarch pass, their expressions unreadable behind layers of scar and memory. They did not fear the coming conflict. They did not welcome it either. They simply recognized it. They had always known this return would not be greeted with open arms. The outpost's central promenade offered a view of the void outside, where the sepulchre of the living remained docked like a slumbering beast of silent reverence. At its flanks, the reverend host stood at precise intervals, their armor faintly pulsing with self-sustaining life. They were unmoving, yet they gave the sense that they were waiting, not for command, but for answer. Elion stopped before the viewport. Stars glimmered distantly, their light diminished by the swirling dust of ancient stellar remnants. A place forgotten by the galaxy, a fitting place for a memory to return. Sariel stepped closer. They will force us to defend ourselves, and when we do, the Imperium will see only rebellion. Not rebellion, Elion said softly. Survival. Sariel looked at him. Really looked. For so long, Elion had carried sorrow in silence, bearing a burden that no warrior could strike down. But now Sariel saw something else beneath that sorrow. Resolve. We cannot run, Sariel said. No, Elion agreed. If we flee, we validate their fear. If we fight to kill, we become the monster they will claim us to be. There is no path without cost. Vaughn stood several paces behind, listening but offering no interruption. He understood that he spoke now not with a military commander, but with the consequence of history itself. Elion continued, We must show them what we are, not weapons, not abominations, but the memory of what humanity once sought to become. Sariel lowered his head, though not in disagreement. Mercy has cost us before. It will cost us again, Elion replied, but mercy is the only path that preserves meaning. From across the promenade came the soft echo of hurried steps. A young communications officer approached, clutching a data slate with both hands, her breaths unsteady. She stopped several paces away, lowering her gaze in respect mixed with fear. My lord, she said, voice taut, a ship has entered the system. Imperial registry code confirmed. A frigate, alone. Sariel's eyebrows lifted. Alone? Commander Vaughn frowned. Unusual. A frigate does not respond to ecclesiarchy decrees alone. Unless... He stopped. The meaning was clear without speaking it. Unless the ship was already on its way before the decree was sent. Elion extended a hand. The officer placed the slate into it, her fingers trembling only once. Elion scanned the identification sigils. It is not a warship, Sariel observed. It carries no heavy armament. It carries something far more dangerous, Vaughn said grimly. A message. The frigate transmitted a docking request. No weapons charged, no threats issued, no posturing at all. That, more than anything, set every nerve on edge. Elion nodded once. Permit docking. Sariel, with me. The docking pier was lined with reverent host on one side and outpost soldiers on the other. Two groups who would normally stand worlds apart. Now held together by a shared uncertainty neither had words for. When the airlock cycled open, the pressure shift was almost silent. The figure who stepped out wore robes of deep maroon, trimmed with black thread. Not armor, not ecclesiarchal opulence. Something simpler, a scholar's garment. She moved with careful steps, not fearful, but deliberate, as though every motion was chosen, not assumed. Her face was unscarred, though her eyes carried the fatigue of someone who had spent a lifetime searching for truth she feared to find. Sariel whispered, not a cardinal, not an inquisitor, a historian. Elion waited. The woman stopped a short distance away and bowed, not as a priest bows to scripture, but as a student bows to a teacher they have long studied but never met. My name is Sister Lysa of the Archivum Orison, she said. Her voice held no tremor. I come not to condemn you, I come because I read the records that survived. Sariel's breath caught. There were no records. There could be no records. Elion regarded her with a gaze soft enough to be called gentle. Then you know who we are. Sister Lisa nodded slowly. I believed so, but belief and truth are not always the same. I came to see for myself. Sariel half stepped forward, instinctively protective. The ecclesiarchy will declare you heretic for even speaking to us. Lisa's faint smile held no joy. Then let them. My faith is not built on fear. Elion studied her. Not just her words, but the shape of them, the history behind them. What is it you wish to know? He asked. Her answer was quiet, but it carried through the hall with the weight of a question that had haunted humanity for 10,000 years. What was he truly like? The hall went still. No weapon had ever struck harder than that question. Not because it demanded knowledge, but because it demanded memory. Elion did not answer immediately. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke, it was not with emotion, but with recollection carved so deeply it could never fade. He was kind, Elion said. Not gentle, kind. Kindness is the choice to see another's suffering and still believe they are worth guiding. He believed humanity could be more than fear, more than survival, more than worship. Sister Lisa's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. Then why did the Imperium become this? Elion opened his eyes. Because kindness is easily forgotten, he said, and fear remembers too well. The lights dimmed, only slightly, but enough to draw attention. One of the outpost officers rushed in, face pale. A fleet has translated into system range, multiple capital signatures, flagship identified, Basilican class. The ecclesiarchy has arrived. Sariel straightened. The reverent host silently shifted, their armor pulsing like hearts preparing for strain. Sister Lisa did not move away. Elion turned toward the viewport. The void outside was no longer quiet. Shapes slid into view, vast, cathedral-armored warships forged not for travel, but for judgment. Sariel spoke softly, his voice not trembling but heavy with history repeating itself. It has begun. Elion placed a hand on the glass. The reflection of his face in the viewport showed both memory and inevitability. No, he said, it has only returned. The warships held their formation in the cold void, like a wall of sanctified steel, their hulls adorned with cathedral spires and gold-wrought iconography. Enormous stained-glass viewports glimmered with the reflected light of distant stars, each panel depicting triumphs, martyrdoms, crusades, all of it a scripture of dominance carried not in faith, but in power. Incense burners hung like censers from armored plating, trailing plumes of smoke that drifted uselessly in vacuum. The weapons beneath those symbols, macro cannons, lance arrays, torpedo silos, were not ceremonial. They were absolute. From the outpost vantage platform, Elion watched in silence. The void filled with Imperial firepower, and yet the silence seemed heavier than battle. Sariel stood to his right, hands clasped behind his back, posture disciplined and grounded, though the tension in his voice could not be hidden. They came swiftly, he said, too swiftly. Sister Lisa, positioned just behind them, completed the unspoken conclusion, which means they were already moving before your transmission. They did not come to investigate. They came to confirm. Elion nodded faintly. The ecclesiarchy fears memory. It always has. Memory carries truth, and truth has no doctrine to obey. Below, the outpost crew hurried to defensive stations, not to resist, but to brace for the arrival of forces they could not stop. Commander Vaughn issued calm, clear orders. No panic, no surrender, only structure. He did not order the void shields raised. He did not order the guns primed. The outpost would not fire upon the Imperium. For Vaughn understood the truth too. One shot was enough to brand this place a rebellion. A transmission flickered onto the hollow display before them. A robed figure stepped into view, inquisitorial in bearing, though dressed in the ceremonial vestments of the ecclesiarchal dominion. His face was thin, ascetic, eyes deep-set and unwavering. He spoke with the tone of one accustomed to being obeyed before being heard. "Attention, Outpost Tertium 9. I am High Inquisitor Varad of the Holy Orders of the God Emperor's Inquisition. You harbour abominable constructs of profane genesis. You will open your airlocks and surrender these beings for immediate purgation. Failure to comply will result in complete atmospheric venting and orbital sterilization." Sariel exhaled sharply, though not in surprise. "He does not negotiate." "No," Sister Lisa said quietly. "He preaches." Vaughn stepped to the display, speaking evenly. "High Inquisitor, this outpost is under my command. I request clarification. These beings have made no hostile action. They have—" "Silence," Varad replied, not loudly, but with a precision that cut. "You do not understand what stands beside you. They are remnants of a discarded lie, tools of a dead philosophy. They are rot given muscle and memory. They are what the Emperor rejected." Elion stepped into view. Varad's expression changed. Not to fear, not to awe, to recognition. "You," Varad said. "Then it is true. The 11th has crawled from the grave of history." "History does not bury truth," Elion replied. "Only men do." Varad's lips tightened. "Your existence threatens the Imperium." "Not my existence," Elion corrected. "My memory." Sariel glanced at Elion, pride and pain threaded together. Sister Lysa looked at Varad as though seeing the embodiment of the very fracture she had spent her life studying. Varad continued, voice controlled but burning. "The Emperor ascended. He is God. His will shapes all existence. The Imperium stands because humanity believes." Elion's eyes held a grief deeper than stars. The Emperor stood because humanity hoped. Belief came later. Fear came after that. The silence that followed did not linger. Varad's hand moved in a gesture that ended empires. "Prepare for Exterminatus protocols." Gasps broke through the command deck. Not screams, not chaos, but shock so deep it made the skin tighten. Sariel took one step forward, every instinct in him waking at once. Vaughn reacted first, his voice sharp. "You would order extermination for one outpost. These people are loyal. They have committed no heresy." Varad did not blink. Heresy is not always an act. Sometimes it is proximity. Sister Lysa's voice rose, not loud, but clear. "You fear him, not for what he has done, but because he remembers what you have forgotten." For the first time, Varad's calm cracked by the smallest fraction. Memory is dangerous when it undermines unity. When truth threatens order, truth must be silenced. Sariel's voice was steady. "Then you do not defend faith. You defend fear." Varad's expression became serene, as though he welcomed that accusation. Faith is born from fear, and fear is what binds humanity together. If the Imperium must stand upon fear, then fear is holy. The transmission ended. The fleet outside began to shift. Weapons powered up. Elion closed his eyes. He had known this moment might come. He simply had hoped the galaxy had changed more than he had. Sariel turned toward him. "Say the word, and we will destroy them before they fire." The sepulchre can tear through a basilican-class hull. We have the strength. We can protect these people. Elion opened his eyes. There was no hesitation, but there was sorrow. If we answer fire with fire, we prove them right. Sariel's voice roughened. If we do not, we die. We will not die, Elion said. Not yet. He stepped forward, speaking not to Sariel, not to Vaughn, not to Sister Lisa, but to the reverend host, whose silent ranks filled the outpost halls. We will go, Elion said. We will withdraw from this place, not in defeat, not in fear, but so that memory may travel further than the reach of their guns. Sariel stared at him. You intend to abandon the civilians? No, Elion said. We take them with us. The outpost fell silent. The decision was impossible, and yet it breathed. Vaughn stepped forward. The lives here, my people, cannot abandon their duties. They are bound to service. Sister Lysa looked at him, her voice gentle. Bound to what service, Commander? To hold a position the Imperium does not protect. To die so that others may avoid remembering. Vaughn closed his eyes and exhaled, then nodded. I will give the evacuation order. Sariel did not move for a moment. His body remained still, but his eyes flickered with conflict, duty, loyalty, fear, love, all the things that had made him human long before he became something beyond it. He stepped to Elion's side. Tell me the path, he said. Elion looked once more through the viewport. The warships glowed with the readiness of holy fury, but beyond them, farther still, beyond the visible light, the warp shimmered with currents shaped by memory. We go where they will not follow, Elion said, where memory is not forbidden. Sister Lisa understood first. The threshold worlds, she whispered, the places abandoned during the age of fragmentation, places without record, without oversight, without doctrine. Sariel drew in a slow breath. So it begins again. Elion placed his hand on Sariel's shoulder. No, it continues. The alarms began to sound. The outpost prepared to move. History shifted, not violently, not loudly, but like something long buried rising silently toward light. The evacuation order spread through the outpost like a whispered storm. It did not bring panic. The people of Imperium 9 had lived too long under the quiet strain of abandonment to fear motion or change. Instead, a solemn purpose took root in them. They gathered what they could carry, locked consoles into data caskets, sealed reliquaries of memory and history, and prepared without protest. They did not ask where they were going. They did not ask whether the Imperium would call them traitors. They understood that survival was sometimes loyalty to something older than orders. Elion walked among them as they prepared, not to command, but to witness. Some of the outpost crew stared at him with reverence, others with uncertainty, and still others with a fragile hope that trembled like a candle in a cold chamber. They did not know him, not truly. They knew only that something ancient and human stood before them, something they had not been taught to expect, a leader who neither demanded worship nor obedience. Sariel oversaw the reverend host as they coordinated the transfer. The legionaries moved with precision and silence, lifting bulk cargo as though it weighed nothing, stabilizing grav pallets, carrying wounded psychers and medici equipment. Their movements were not those of conquerors or soldiers. They moved like builders, like guardians. It unsettled those who watched, because the galaxy had taught them to expect violence from power, not care. Sister Lysa assisted with the archival materials. She selected what few historical fragments might matter, not because the data was precious in itself, but because knowledge was always the first casualty of fear. She stored them as though preserving embers from a fire long extinguished. Commander Vaughn coordinated the final sequencing of reactor controls, disabling the outpost's signal relay so it could not be traced after departure. Yet even with their preparations underway, the outpost trembled under the shadow of the fleet outside. The ecclesiarchal warships did not fire, not yet, but their presence pressed against the senses like a hand around the throat. Their silence was worse than bombardment. Bombardment was a promise. Silence was judgment. The threat of annihilation hung closer with every passing moment. The boarding alarms chimed, a deep, resonant tone that shook the deck plating. "They're coming," Sariel said, voice steady. Elion nodded once. "They will attempt to seize the command deck first." "And if they see the evacuation?" Sister Lisa asked. "They will name it Flight from Judgment," Vaughn said. "And then they will open fire." The boarding tubes latched onto the hull with magnetic anchors. The metal groaned like wounded steel. Sariel signaled to the nearest legionaries, who moved to the entry corridor, forming a barrier. They did not draw weapons. They had none to draw. Their bodies were their armor and blade. The first breach charge detonated. Smoke rolled like heavy fog. From within it stepped armored figures in crimson and gold plate, the phratry of sanctified flame, shock troops of the ecclesiarchy. Their helmets bore the hollow-eyed visages of saints. Their bolters were inscribed with prayers etched into the casings. "Stand aside," their captain declared. "By decree of the Synod, these heretical beings are to be seized and destroyed." Sariel stepped forward, unarmed, posture relaxed yet unyielding. "We do not seek war. Let the civilians pass. Let them go free." The captain raised his bolter. "Compassion does not absolve blasphemy." Elion moved then, not quickly, not with threat. He simply stepped into view. The captain froze, not from fear, from recognition he did not understand. Elion spoke softly, like one speaking to someone in pain. "You do not know the man you invoke when you say his name. I knew him. I saw him build a future with his own hands, one where humanity did not need gods. If you would kill in his name, then kill with truth, not with fear." The captain hesitated, not in belief, but in conflict. Training warred with instinct, doctrine with memory buried so deep it had no voice. The soldiers behind him shifted, uncertain. The captain's voice cracked only once. "Faith is all we have." Elion's gaze held no condemnation, only sorrow. "Then faith has been made too small." The captain fired. The bolter round struck Elion's armor and tore through living flesh. Blood spilled, bright and red and shockingly human. The soldiers gasped. Elion did not fall. The wound closed slowly at first, then faster, flesh knitting itself strand by strand. Sariel did not move to defend. He only watched. Elion stepped forward, not accelerated, not charging, simply moving through the space between them. He reached the captain and placed a hand on the bolter's barrel. "Do you see?" Elion asked quietly. The captain stared, transfixed. "This is not immortality," Elion continued. "It is memory given form. Every wound is carried. Every pain is kept. Nothing forgotten." The captain could not speak. His bolter lowered, not by force, but because his arm no longer wished to oppose what stood before him. But the priests behind him did not hesitate. They fired, not at Elion, at Sariel. The round struck Sariel's chest and shoulder, tearing deep. Sariel staggered, but did not fall. Pain rippled through him, not pain of the body, but pain of recognition. The ecclesiarchy had not come to understand. They had come to erase. The reverend host stepped forward now, not out of rage, but out of necessity. Their hands, closed around bolter barrels, crushing them as though they were fragile clay. They did not strike. They did not kill. They only moved the enemy back, step by steady step, forcing the ecclesiastical troops into retreat. Yet the priests did not fear death. They feared irrelevance. They ignited their purgation torches, unleashing cinders of incendiary flame that clung to armor and air alike. Fire surged through the corridor, bright enough to overwhelm vision. The outpost shook as shockwaves from blast doors triggered containment. Sariel spoke over the roar, voice unbroken despite blood streaking his armor. The fleet will interpret this as resistance. They will fire. Elion nodded. Then we must leave now. Commander Vaughn activated his Vox. All hands, board the Sepulchre. Evacuation priority 1. Shuttle Bay 3 is primary ingress. Move. The corridors filled with motion. Soldiers guiding civilians, psychers supported by medici staff. Data crates passed from hand to hand. The reverent host formed moving walls, shielding the vulnerable from fire and shrapnel. Sister Lisa stayed near Elion, though she carried no weapon. Her presence was steady, not courageous, steady. The kind of steadiness born from finally knowing her purpose. As they reached the docking platform, the massive boarding arms retracted, sealing them inside the sepulchre of the living. The fortress ship shuddered as its internal mechanisms awakened, ancient reactors humming with the deep resonance of awakened memory. Sariel leaned heavily, but remained upright. The wounds on his chest were closing slowly, though each repair left a new scar layered atop the countless others. Elion placed a hand on Sariel's shoulder, not healing him, acknowledging him. Sariel looked out toward the viewport, where the warships began repositioning for bombardment. The Imperium has chosen the path, he said softly. Elion's gaze was distant, beyond the moment, beyond the stars. No, he replied. Fear has chosen. The Imperium only follows. The sepulchre disengaged, engines igniting with a low harmonic pulse. The outpost dwindled behind them. Then the first lance strike fell. Light erupted like the birth of a false sun. But the sepulchre did not look back, because memory does not need to. The sepulchre of the living drifted through the void on silent thrusters, its great hull shedding the last traces of the outpost's atmosphere as it separated fully from the docking arms. Behind it, Tertium-9 burned, columns of incandescent fire rising into the blackness, the ecclesiastical fleet carrying out its purgation with ritual precision. No screams reached the void, only light, only memory. In the observation hall, Sariel stood alone before the vast viewing pane. His armor still bore the blackened scars of the bolter rounds that had torn into him. The wounds beneath had already healed, new tissue woven over old, but the memory of impact, the shock, the sound, the flash, remained vivid. Every scar lived inside him. Every wound endured became another line of history carved into flesh that refused to forget. He watched the outpost burn, jaw set, shoulders squared as though holding up a weight he had carried for too many centuries. Elion had not followed him yet. He had known Sariel needed this moment, not for clarity, but to face the shape of what they had become. Mercy had brought ruin. Restraint had been answered with flame, and the innocents who had trusted them were now ashes scattered in the cold dark. A faint sound, footsteps without weight, signaled Sister Lysa's approach. She did not speak immediately. Her presence was gentle, not intrusive. She stood beside Sariel, her gaze drawn not to the flames, but to his face. "You are mourning," she said. Sariel did not look at her. "We carry memory. We do not mourn." That is a contradiction spoken to protect the wound from being acknowledged, she replied. To remember is to mourn. There is no separation. Sariel exhaled, a slow, tightly measured breath. If we mourn every life lost, we drown. There is too much death, too much time, too much of everything. And if you refuse to mourn, Lysa said, you turn into stone. His eyes flicked toward her then, not with anger, but with a kind of tiredness only the immortal ever knew. The tiredness of a wound that never healed because it was never allowed to close. Stone does not break, Sariel said. But neither does it feel sunlight, she answered. Silence followed. Outside, the last fragments of Tertium-9 drifted apart like dying embers of a fire once warm and living. At last, Sariel spoke again, voice quieter. I knew this was coming. I have always known. The Imperium would not embrace us. But hope. He closed his eyes briefly. Hope is a traitor that whispers we may still be human. Sister Lysa looked at him with the steady perception of someone who had spent her life studying things others feared to name. And do you believe you are not? Sariel answered, without hesitation. We are not mortal. That is not what I asked. He did not speak, because he did not know. Elion entered then, his presence soft, like gravity shifting rather than a footfall sounding. He moved to stand beside them, but did not look at Sariel first. He looked at the burning remains of the outpost. I carry the memory of the Emperor standing in a field of shattered stone, Elion said quietly. When we were very new to the world, he did not look triumphant, though he had united cities behind him that day. He looked tired of taking life so that life could be guided. Sariel listened, though his gaze remained fixed outward. He said then, Elion continued, that nothing he built would endure unless humanity learned to choose compassion without being commanded to. Sariel's jaw tightened. Compassion did not save those people. No, Elion agreed. There was no softness in his tone, only truth. But killing would not have saved them either. Sariel turned now, eyes sharp with the pain of understanding. Then what are we meant to do? If the Imperium will not listen, if mercy is answered with fire, if we cannot fight and cannot flee, what path remains? Elion looked at him, not as a commander to a subordinate, but as a father to a son whose heart was tearing under the strain of belief. We remain ourselves, Elion said, even when the galaxy demands we become something else. Sariel's expression twisted. Anger, grief, loyalty, confusion. We are warriors, but we are forbidden to wage war. We are saviors, but we cannot save. We are memory. His voice broke, just faintly. But memory does not change fate. Elion placed his hand on Sariel's shoulder. Memory shapes the future. Sariel looked away, unable to accept the comfort. Not because he rejected Elion's words, but because accepting them meant accepting the burden that came with them. The burden of continuing. A voice echoed from the comm console. My lord, came Vaughn's voice, strained but controlled. The civilians are stable in the lower decks, but we have a problem. Elion's attention sharpened. Speak. An ecclesiarchal strike wing has broken formation. They are pursuing us. 3 cruisers, 2 escort frigates. They are gaining. They intend to disable our drives. Sariel stepped forward immediately. Then we turn and... No, Elion said, before the thought could finish forming. We do not destroy those who serve out of fear. Then what? Sariel demanded. Allow them to fire upon us? Allow them to die believing we are the monsters they hunt? Sister Lysa watched them both, silent but attentive, the quiet center around which 2 great forces strained. Elion spoke with a calm that did not waver. We must show them. Sariel blinked. Show them what? Elion breathed, not in weariness, but in preparation. What it means to endure without hate. Vaughn's voice returned through the comm. Impact in 60 seconds. Sariel's voice grew tight. We have no shield strong enough to withstand sustained fire. We will not need to, Elion said. He began to walk out of the observation hall. Sariel followed, not understanding but unable not to follow. Sister Lysa moved as well, because something in her knew this moment would define everything that came after. The three of them entered the primary command spire. Every officer turned toward them, waiting. Elion's voice carried across the chamber in a quiet tone that left no space for doubt. Disengage all weapon systems. Vaughn did not look surprised, but his voice carried the disbelief others felt. That will leave us defenseless. Yes, Elion said. Exactly. Sariel stared at him. Elion, they will fire. Yes, Elion repeated. Sariel stepped forward. No longer captain, no longer soldier, just a man who could not bear the inevitable. Then we die. Elion turned to him. The sorrow in his eyes was not fear, it was memory. No, Elion said softly. We show them that we do not fear death. The bridge fell silent, because this was not surrender. It was something more impossible, refusal. The ecclesiarchal ships closed in, lances charged, macro cannons locked, the first strike fired, and Elion spoke, not aloud, not to minds, not to flesh, but into memory itself. A wave of psychic resonance radiated from him, not force, not compulsion, not domination. A memory, a moment, a truth, standing beside the Emperor, hearing him laugh, not in triumph, not in victory, in humanity. The lance strike faltered, a delay of seconds, a hesitation, but hesitation is a universe. Sariel exhaled. Sister Lysa's hand went to her mouth. Vaughn whispered a prayer with no God in it. The ecclesiarchal ships hung motionless in space, as though remembering something they had never lived. Sariel's voice was barely breath. What did you do? Elion watched the stilled fleet, eyes distant and unbearably human. I reminded them, he said, for just one moment. The moment would not last, but seeds had been planted, and seeds, once planted, grow. The hesitation of the ecclesiarchal fleet lasted only seconds. A miracle of stillness in the void, a breath held by fate. But seconds are enough to change the shape of memory, and memory is enough to reshape belief. When the warships resumed their advance, there was no renewed fury in their motions. Their formation tightened, their pace slowed. The rigid hunger for purgation had softened into caution. They did not fire, they stalked. Yet even hesitation was a temporary grace. Sariel watched the flickering traces of Auspex readouts as the ships adjusted position. His jaw remained tense, but the storm that had raged behind his eyes since Tertium 9 had stilled. Not calmed, stilled. Like the ocean before a storm one knows will break. Elion stood at the central command dais, unmoving. Gaze fixed not on the tactical displays but on the stars beyond. His voice, when it came, was soft. They have not chosen mercy, he said. Only doubt. Sariel nodded. Doubt is not peace. No, Elion agreed. But it is a beginning. Commander Vaughn's voice carried the controlled strain of a man balancing duty and survival. They're preparing to hail us again, likely to demand surrender. Sister Lysa leaned closer, studying the augurs. No, she murmured. Not demand. Attempt to understand what they felt. Sariel looked at her sharply. They will call it manipulation. Lysa shook her head. The mind knows its prisons. The heart remembers freedom even if it has never felt it. They are confused. And confusion is dangerous, yes, but it is also fertile. Sariel breathed out slowly. Confusion can become fear. Fear becomes fire. Elion turned to him then, and it can become thought. Thought can become remembrance. Sariel did not argue. He only looked away. The comm display flickered. A new transmission formed, but the face that appeared was not Varad. His expression had contained certainty layered in doctrine. The woman who replaced him bore neither certainty nor doctrine. She wore the same vestments of office, but the sigils of her rank had been cut away, not torn, not burned, cut carefully, as though removed with respect. Her dark hair was braided tight against her head, her eyes clear, unguarded. There was no arrogance in her expression, only weariness. "I am Canoness Athela of the Sacred Order of the Silver Gate," she said. "Elion, I speak to you with the authority of my conscience, not my title." Sariel stiffened. Elion inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission. "Athela," he said, "I remember your order. You tend to the gateways of lost worlds, those who keep watch on what has been abandoned." Athela's breath hitched, not with shock, but recognition. "Yes," she whispered. "We were taught that our watch belonged to a sacred duty, but we were never told what we watched for." Elion's voice softened. "You watched for memory, for what the Imperium would one day refuse to face." The bridge remained silent. Even the tech adepts, even the mortal crew who barely understood the words, felt the gravity of them. Athela closed her eyes briefly. "I felt what you showed us. It was not prophecy, not command. It was—" Sister Lisa finished for her, voice gentle. "Humanity." Athela's eyes opened again, clearer now, sadder now. "If I speak to my fleet of what I felt, they will call me corrupted. They will relieve me, or worse." Sariel's voice was steady. "Then why speak at all?" A faint smile touched Athela's lips. "Because belief is not obedience, and faith without truth is only fear." The bridge seemed to inhale. Elion stepped forward, though the image on the screen remained unchanged. "You already carry the truth. You need not proclaim it, only live it." Athela nodded, but then her expression shifted, sorrow cutting deeper. "But there is another, someone who will never allow doubt to take root. High Inquisitor Varad has already issued a command. Reinforcements are coming, not to overwhelm." She swallowed. "To annihilate." Sariel didn't flinch. "Exterminatus?" "No." Athela shook her head. "Something worse. They intend to summon a relic fleet, a pilgrimage armada, a symbol, not a strike force. Tens of thousands of ships, millions of believers. The Imperium will not simply kill you. It will drown the memory of you beneath devotion." Silence fell, a silence heavy with inevitability. Lisa closed her eyes. "To erase memory, you drown it in story." Elion lowered his gaze. "Yes." Sariel took a step forward, and for the first time since the outpost's destruction, his voice broke fully free, unburdened of restraint. "Then we cannot run. We cannot evade. If we flee again, we teach the galaxy that memory retreats." Elion lifted his eyes to meet Sariel's. "We will not flee." Sariel's breath trembled, not in fear, but in the weight of conviction forming. "Then what must we do?" Elion did not answer immediately. His voice, when it came, carried the unbroken stillness of truth. "To show the Imperium what it has become, we must go where its reflection is clearest." Athela understood first, and her face paled. "No, Elion, if you go there, they will tear you apart." Sariel's voice dropped to a whisper. Terror. The word itself felt like a wound, reopening across centuries. Lisa's voice was quiet, reverent, afraid. You would return to the cradle of everything. Elion nodded once. The Imperium forgot us because it forgot him, and memory must return to where it was lost. Sariel's resolve steadied into something sharp. Then I will stand at your side. Elion looked at him, and for a moment, the weight lifted. You always have. Athela bowed her head, not in pledge, not in devotion, but in farewell. Then may humanity remember through you, she whispered. The transmission ended. No applause, no battle cry, no triumph, only decision. A decision that would change the shape of the galaxy. Commander Vaughn murmured the words that every soul on the bridge felt. We go to Terra. Elion placed his hand on the command dais. Set course. The stars shifted. The sepulchre turned. Memory moved toward its origin. And the Imperium felt something awaken. The warp did not welcome them. It never had. As the sepulchre of the living translated into the immaterium, the ship's internal lighting dimmed, and the deep harmonic pulse of its core shifted into a resonance that was felt more in bone than in ear. The living metal tissues of the vessel reacted instinctively, sinew tightening beneath armor plating as though bracing against a storm. The warp churned around them like a sea of memory and emotion given monstrous shape. For most ships, passage through such tides required navigators, runes, chanting, prayer. The reverent host required none of these. They did not fear the warp because the warp had no new horrors to show them. They had already lived them. Sariel walked the central passageway, listening to the faint whispering at the edges of perception. Voices calling to him from every fragment of memory he had ever sworn to bury. He knew these whispers. They were familiar. They spoke not with lies, but with truths he wished were lies. You cannot save him. He ignored it. You cannot save yourself. He ignored that too. Sariel's steps were steady, but inside him something shifted. A pressure. A growing tightness under the weight of choices not yet made. He passed a bulkhead where hundreds of civilians gathered, huddled but quiet, whispering prayers, not to gods, but to possibility. The reverent host stood watch among them, still and silent. Some children stared up at the legionaries with wide eyes. Children had a way of recognizing things adults had forgotten how to see. One small boy tugged gently at Sariel's gauntlet as he passed. His voice was soft. You saved us. Sariel stopped. The words did not feel like praise. They felt like accusation. He knelt, lowering himself to the boy's level. No, Sariel said quietly. We moved you from a place where death came quickly to a place where death comes slower. That is not the same as saving. The boy didn't flinch. His answer was simple, unadorned. You came back for us. That is saving. Sariel swallowed once. He rose and continued walking, but the words stayed with him. The whisper of the warp grew louder. He does not know what he is leading you toward. Sariel did not respond, because the voice was not wrong. In the strategium, Elion stood before the star maps projected in shifting pale light. Terror shone at their center, not bright, not glorious, but heavy. A weight, the weight of history, control, belief and silence. The sepulchre drifted toward it, through unreality, its path steady and unbroken. Sister Lisa stood near Elion, analyzing the warp currents and psychic harmonics that surrounded the ship. She did not speak first. She had learned Elion spoke when speaking mattered. His voice, when it came, was slow. The closer we come to Terra, the more the warp thickens. Not from corruption, from memory. Humanity has poured 10,000 years of longing, fear, and worship into one idea. It has become a gravity of spirit. Lisa's hands tightened on the data slate. And you intend to enter it? Yes. Sariel entered then. Elion turned. A question flickered in his gaze. Not suspicion, not concern, only awareness. Sariel, he said. My lord, Sariel replied. But his voice held something it had not held before. Strain. Elion stepped toward him with quiet understanding. You have something to say. Sariel did not answer immediately. He stared at Terra's slowly approaching symbol in the map. When we return, Sariel said, the Imperium will not send hesitation. It will send certainty. It will send legions, Astartes, Titans, saints shaped from faith, not flesh, and the people we rescued will die for being near us. Lisa inhaled sharply, not in fear, but in the recognition of truth spoken plainly. Elion nodded. Yes. Sariel turned to him now. His voice had no anger in it, only pain. Then why go to Terra? Elion's answer was not a declaration. It was quiet. Because I cannot call the Imperium back to humanity from the shadows. If memory hides, fear wins. Sariel shook his head, slow, heavy. I know why you must go. I do not ask for argument. I ask for truth. What do you expect to find there? Forgiveness, recognition, a moment of understanding, a single whisper of the man he once was. Elion looked away, not in shame, in remembering. I do not expect to find him as he was, he said. I only hope the memory of him still lives in someone. Sariel closed his eyes. There was the breaking, not loud, not violent, the gentle fracturing of something that had been held too tightly for too long. My lord, Sariel said softly, I believe in you. I always have. I followed you into silence and exile. I followed you when the galaxy forgot us. I followed you when hope was nothing but a wound we kept reopening to remember we could feel. Elion's gaze returned to him, patient, open, steady. And now you cannot, Elion said. Sariel's breath shook, just once. No, he whispered. Now I fear that following you will mean losing you, and I cannot bear remembering your death for eternity. Sister Lysa looked away. The moment was too intimate, too human for her to intrude upon. Elion placed his hand on Sariel's shoulder. Death is not what you fear. You fear purpose that ends. Sariel's voice cracked. Yes. A silence passed between them, not cold, but warm with shared history. Then Sariel spoke again, and this was the moment the galaxy would remember. I cannot go to Terra. Not now. Not with you. Elion did not withdraw his hand. He did not tighten it either. He simply accepted the truth. Then you must choose your path, he said. Sariel's eyes closed. I will lead the others, he said. Those who cannot follow you into hope. Those who cannot bear the pain of believing again. We will find a place where memory can survive, not to challenge you, not to oppose you, to guard what remains. Elion nodded. This was not betrayal born of ambition. It was betrayal born of love, and those are always the deepest wounds. The warp pulsed around them, as if listening. Lisa spoke quietly, voice trembling with realization. The reverent host will divide. Sariel bowed his head. Yes. Elion stepped forward one last time, and instead of a command, he offered an embrace. Sariel accepted it, the first embrace they had shared in centuries. When they stepped apart, something final had formed between them. Not hatred, not abandonment, the understanding that paths born together do not always walk side by side. Sariel turned to go, but before he left, he said one last thing. My lord, if you find him, tell him we remembered. Elion closed his eyes. and whispered, "I never forgot." Sariel left the strategium, and the ship seemed to tilt around him, not physically, but in the way fate shifts course. Half the Legion would follow Elion to Terra, half would follow Sariel to exile. Not enemies. Two halves of the same memory, one to reveal, one to preserve. The warp roared around the sepulchre, terror drew closer, and history prepared to open its oldest wound. The division did not happen with shouting, nor rage, nor the primal shattering that accompanies betrayal sung in legend. It happened in silence, a silence that felt like the last breath held before a name is spoken for the final time. The reverent host gathered in the Grand Transit Hall, the vast chamber where flesh-grown pillars held vaulted ceilings of pale organic alloy. The walls pulsed with a slow, heartbeat-like rhythm, the living metal of the ship sensing what was about to occur. Elion stood at the center, Sariel beside him, not as adversaries, but as brothers standing at the edge of a road that forked. The legionaries did not line up in formation. They simply chose a step forward or a step back. No one spoke. No one needed to. Each warrior carried memories layered upon memories, and memory has its own gravity. Some stepped toward Elion, their eyes holding a quiet fire, the fire of belief renewed, fragile but unbroken. Others stepped toward Sariel, their expressions solemn, steady, bearing loyalty tempered by love and fear. The split was nearly even. When it was done, Elion and Sariel stood facing each other, with their respective halves behind them. The air between them felt thick, heavy enough to stop sound and breath. Sariel spoke first, voice quiet. "This is not a sundering of faith." "No," Elion agreed, his tone the same. "It is the shape faith must take when it cannot bear itself." The two halves of the Legion stood still, every warrior carved from memory and sorrow. Sister Lisa watched from the periphery, her hands clasped tightly around the archivum slate. She knew she was witnessing a moment history would try to erase, and fail. Commander Vaughn stood beside her, jaw tense. "How do you divide something that was never whole to begin with?" he murmured. Lisa answered softly, "By acknowledging that unity built on silence is not unity at all." Sariel stepped forward, meeting Elion halfway. "You once told us," Sariel said, "that we were made to remember so that humanity would not forget its own face. But memory is a weight, Elion, too heavy to bear alone. I will carry half." Elion's eyes held grief and pride in equal measure. "Then I am not alone, and neither is humanity." There was no ceremony, no ritual of parting. Sariel simply turned, and his half of the Legion turned with him. They walked toward the sepulchre's secondary hangar bays, where drop craft and long-range vessels waited like dormant seeds. They would leave the fleet soon after warp exit. They would find worlds beyond Imperial highways, beyond administration and decree. Worlds where memory could live in quiet, unspoken refuge. But before Sariel reached the departure doors, the warp rippled. Not as a sound, but as a presence. Something long watching, long waiting had taken notice. The lights dimmed, the walls shuddered. The world pulsed as if it were breathing out a sigh older than stars. A voice echoed, not in the air, but in every mind that had ever doubted. "You do not need to suffer." Sariel stopped, mid-stride. He had heard that voice before. Not clearly, not directly, but in dreams that were not dreams, memories that were not memories. It was not the voice of a demon. Demons offered hunger, hunger dressed in promise. This voice offered release, release from remembering. The whisper deepened, sweet and terrible. "Let go, let memory fade. You have earned rest. Sariel's breathing slowed. His hands trembled just enough to see. Elion's voice cut through the chamber with calm that felt like a blade. Sariel. Sariel did not turn yet. The voice pressed closer. You have carried too much. At last, someone sees you. Someone understands. Let go. Let the burden fall. There is peace in forgetting. Sariel exhaled. Not a sigh, but a shudder. Finally, he turned to face Elion fully. The legionaries watched him without moving, but their eyes that had forgotten how to weep, shimmered with something like fear. I hear it, Sariel said, voice barely audible. Not the warp, not madness, the offering, the temptation. Elion stepped toward him, slow and grounded. Yes, because you love, because you care. The warp does not whisper to the cruel. It whispers to the compassionate. Sariel's throat tightened. Then it is my weakness. No, Elion said. It is what makes you worthy to stand. Sariel closed his eyes, and the whisper surged. You were never meant to carry eternity. Only gods may endure memory. You are not a god. Sariel's voice cracked. I do not want to forget, but I do not want to remember forever. Elion's hand rose, not commanding, not restraining, offering. Then share the memory. Let it be lighter in two hearts than too heavy in one. Sariel looked at him, and the whisper changed. He will fail. He will die. You will carry that memory forever. Walk away. Be free. Sariel bowed his head. I know, he whispered. Then he stepped back, not toward Elion, toward his legion, toward his path. He did not accept the warp's offer, but he could not accept Elion's burden either, and that was the truth that broke him gently. When he looked up again, his eyes were steady once more. We will guard the memory, Sariel said. If your path falls into ruin, we will still carry it. If your path triumphs, we will be waiting, not as conquerors, not as saviors, as witnesses. Elion nodded, not in approval, in understanding. There was no anger between them, only the kind of grief that love knows, the kind that does not fade, the kind that stays, the kind that remembers. Sariel turned, and this time, no whisper followed him. The doors opened. The parting was complete. Sister Lisa released a breath she had held for too long. Vaughn murmured, the Legion has split, but it has not broken. Elion watched the doors close behind Sariel. No, he said quietly, it has begun. The warp parted. The sepulchre hurtled onward, toward terror, toward judgment, toward memory's reckoning. The warp corridor through which the sepulchre travelled narrowed to a filament of shimmering distortion, the ship gliding along it like a memory passing through a mind struggling to recall itself. The departure of Sariel and his half of the Legion left a stillness behind, not empty, but heavy, like a room where a voice once spoke every day and now speaks no longer. There was no anger in their absence, but absence itself has weight. Elion remained at the viewport for a long time after the vessels of Sariel's host vanished into the warp mists, their silhouettes swallowed by the slow-turning haze. Sister Lisa stood several paces behind him, her hands folded not in prayer, but in the posture of observation. She had learned that Elion's silence was not retreat, it was process. He did not wall off grief. He let it breathe. It made him more human than anything else about him. At last, he spoke. He was right to leave. Lysa's voice remained soft, the tone of someone who understood that her presence mattered more than her words. Yet it pains you. Yes, Elion answered simply. Pain does not mean error. Pain only means that something mattered. The ship shifted slightly, the warp currents pressing briefly against its hull. Lisa moved closer, studying Elion's profile. Do you believe you will see him again? Elion's eyes remained fixed on the swirling warp light. We were forged for different trials, but memory does not end with separation. Sariel carries a truth I could not. I carry one he cannot. In time, our paths will meet where consequence demands. Lysa considered that. The kind of answer that was not prophecy, but inevitability. He fears losing you. Yes, Elion said, and I fear losing him. But love that tries to hold becomes chain and burden. Love that lets go becomes compass and guide. Before Lisa could reply, the harmonic pulse of the ship shifted again. Not in warning, but in recognition. The warp corridor ahead tightened, its color deepening from pale violet to a more violent spectrum. Crimson streaked with gold. Not the corruption of demons, nor the subtle lure of despair. This was something older, the weight of 1,000 years of belief. Lisa's breath caught. We are approaching the Astronomican's psychic wake. Elion nodded. The Emperor's light does not guide us. It remembers us. The sepulchre emerged from the warp into real space with a quiet ripple, rather than the thunderous lightning bursts that accompanied most vessels. Its presence was not an intrusion. It was a return. And there, dominating the starscape like a god's monument carved into the void, was terror. Not shining, not glorious, massive, layered, scarred, wrapped in orbital defense platforms like bindings around a wounded titan. The light of the Astronomican pulsed from the surface of the throne world. Not bright, not pure, not even steady. It flickered. A beacon held aloft by effort beyond comprehension. Lysa stepped forward, her expression indescribable. Awe, grief, reverence, and something like mourning. This is the birthplace of everything. No, Elion said softly. This is where everything was lost. Alarms sounded across the sepulchre. Soft, distant, ritualized signals. Imperial warships began to reposition. Not in confusion now, but in absolute certainty. Their formation closed around terror like armored teeth around a heart. Sariel's absence now became visible through consequence. Half the legion meant half the strength, half the shield, half the memory. The bridge crew worked in silent coordination. There was no panic, only the weight of inevitability. Commander Vaughn approached Elion, keeping his voice steady. My lord, Imperial channels are open. They are demanding immediate identification and submission to boarding. Elion looked at Terra, not the displays. Open the channel. The Vox relay activated. A litany of authority flooded through. Centuries of Imperial dogma worn into the syllables. You approach the throne world in a vessel of unregistered bioconstruction. You identify yourself with a designation removed from Imperial record. You will power down shields and propulsion and prepare for immediate seizure. Elion did not respond at first. He allowed silence to settle. A moment to remind them this was not a negotiation. Then he spoke, calm, steady, unmistakably clear. I am Elion, 11th son of the Emperor. I do not come to claim the past. I come to speak of the future. The Vox did not reply with hesitation. It replied with fear sharpened into command. There is no 11th. There is no memory of such a name. By decree of the Golden Throne itself, such claims are heresy. Lysa's breath caught, but Elion remained still. I do not ask you to remember the records, he said. Records lie. Memory does not. Another voice cut across the comm, older, deeper, shaped by unspeakable authority. Elion. The bridge froze, not because of the name, but because of the voice. It was quiet, human, worn. a voice that had given everything and received nothing in return. Elion closed his eyes. "I hear you," he said. Not aloud. No sound travelled this way. The bridge crew could not hear the exchange. Only Elion. Only a memory that had never faded. The voice continued, faint as breath. "You should not have returned." Elion answered it with sorrow. "I could not stay away." A long silence. Then, "You will break them." Elion bowed his head. "No, I will remind them." Another silence, deeper, heavier, filled with millennia of regret. "Then come to me." The channel ended. Lisa looked at Elion, realizing she had felt something, even if she could not name it. "That was—" "Yes," Elion said. But he did not speak the name. Sariel, far away, would have felt this moment like the pull of a wound reopening. The sepulchre began its descent toward terror. No weapons raised, no legion roared, no banners flew, only memory returning home. And the Imperium braced to tear itself apart, not from war, from remembrance. The descent toward terror was not swift. The sepulchre of the living entered the void above the throne world with the slowness of a memory resurfacing from deep water. Planetary defense grids tracked its every movement. Thousands of lance batteries, orbital cannons, and cathedral-sized macro shells locked in coordinated firing patterns. They could have obliterated the ship before it crossed the sphere of high orbit. They did not fire, not because they hesitated, but because they waited. On Terra, waiting was not a stillness. It was a blade drawn halfway. The bridge of the sepulchre was quiet. No one spoke. No one moved unnecessarily. They all felt the gravity of this. Not merely the literal pull of the throne world, but the spiritual weight of humanity's birthplace, the cradle and grave of its promise. Sister Lisa stood at the main display, her breath held tight in her chest. She watched the continents below. No open blue oceans, no green plains, no living sky. Terra was a fortress of stone and metal, its surface drowned beneath hive titans and fortress spires. A million lights flickered in the dark like the eyes of watchful gods. But there were no gods here. Only memory. Elion watched in silence. He had expected change. He had not expected this. Terra was no longer a world. It was a reliquary, a monument to a dream calcified into doctrine. The air of memory pressed against him. Even from orbit, he could feel it. Sariel would have known these thoughts, would have understood them without being told. But Sariel was gone now, with half the Legion. The absence vibrated like a low tone under every heartbeat. Commander Vaughn approached Elion, though he did not come too close. The orbital command has halted all fire. They are requesting that only you descend, alone. Lisa's head snapped toward him. A trap. Elion didn't deny it. Of course. Vaughn's gaze darkened. Then we refuse. We land with the full host. We stand with our strength. Elion looked at him, not with command, not with authority, but with understanding. Strength is not always in numbers. Sariel's words earlier echoed in the silence of the mind. I fear remembering your death for eternity. The moment returned like breath drawn and held too long. Elion inhaled slowly. Prepare a single drop pod, not armed, not escorted. Lysa stepped forward sharply. You cannot face them alone. The High Lords will send custodians, and if they do not, the ecclesiarchy will send saints, or worse. You will not be allowed speech. They will not listen. They will strike before you speak your first truth. Then my truth must be spoken with presence, Elion replied. Lisa's voice broke on the edge of its warmth. Presence cannot stop a spear. No, Elion said softly. But memory can. The Ship trembled as orbital docking couplings disengaged. The single drop pod chamber lit with a soft glow, its interior grown from the same living alloy as the ship itself. It pulsed faintly, as though aware of the significance of what it would carry. Lysa remained where she was, hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles paled. "Do you expect to return?" she asked. Elion turned his gaze to her. "I expect what must happen." "That is not an answer," she whispered. "It is the only one I can give." He walked toward the drop chamber, but before he stepped inside, a sound stopped him. Not a command, not a cry, a voice. "Father." It was not spoken aloud. It came from memory, from across the warp. Sariel. Not in regret, not in pleading, in understanding. "I will remember with you." Elion bowed his head once, not to the voice, but to the bond. He stepped into the drop pod. The hatch sealed around him with a hush. The chamber lights dimmed. The release clamps disengaged. The pod fell. There was no roar, no thunder, no fiery wake. The sepulchre released its Primarch as if placing a memory gently back into the world that had forgotten it. The drop descent burned through Terra's polluted stratosphere. Fire licked the pod's outer plating. Atmospheric friction sang around him like distant lamentation. Elion closed his eyes, not in fear, but in reflection. He remembered a field of shattered stone. He remembered laughter. He remembered a hand on his shoulder that meant you are not alone. He remembered humanity before it forgot itself. When the drop pod struck the landing platform, the impact was quiet. Hydraulic locks hissed. The hatch unfurled like a petal. The light that greeted him was harsh and white. Sunlight filtered through toxic layers of atmospheric shielding. The landing platform was ringed by golden figures, custodian guard, tall as angels sculpted in war. Their armor radiated light. Their spears shimmered with the weight of ritual execution. They did not move. Elion stepped forward. The custodians parted, not because they permitted him passage, but because they were waiting. At the far end of the platform, a massive gate opened. Beyond it lay a corridor of gold and bone, the path to the golden throne. Elion walked. His steps echoed, but not as thunder, as memory. No one stopped him. No one challenged him. The custodians watched him pass without expression. They were not guardians now. They were witnesses. The corridor opened into the final chamber, vast, cathedral-like in scope. At its center, upon a throne of machinery and life support mechanisms older than any starship now sailing the void, sat the Emperor. Not a god, not a myth. A man whose body had been sacrificed into instrument. A being alive only in the way a star is alive, burning itself to give light to others. His face was still. His eyes did not open, but his presence filled the chamber like gravity. Elion approached, each step measured, each breath held tight in the weight of the moment. He stood before the Emperor, not to kneel, not to worship, to remember. "Father," Elion said, voice steady and soft, "I have returned, not to restore what was lost, not to undo what has been done, but to show them what you once asked of us." No movement, no word, but something in the air shifted, not wind, meaning. Elion continued, "They have raised you to godhood to escape the fear of being human, but you were never afraid of humanity. You believed in us. You believed we could choose compassion without reward. I came back to remind the galaxy of that. But memory alone cannot save it. It must choose to remember." He placed his hand upon the throne. The chamber pulsed, not with light, with memory. Every custodian outside the chamber inhaled sharply, though none reached for their weapons. Elion closed his eyes. I cannot carry this truth forever. I accept the end of my burden. I give what I am so that memory may live without me. He exhaled, and in that breath, he let go. The regenerative pulse in his flesh ceased. The immortality he had carried like a scar broke. Elion became mortal. His body swayed, yielded, like a great weight had been set down at last. He whispered, "I remember you." And from the throne, a whisper answered, "And I remember you." Elion smiled. He collapsed. The living host, orbiting far above, felt it. Sariel, somewhere in the dark beyond stars, felt it. Sister Lisa fell to her knees, choking on breath that no longer knew how to hold grief. Elion did not die in silence. He died in memory, and memory does not end. Not here, not now, not ever.